When Felipe discovered that his wife was cheating on him, she was pregnant. But what she didn't know is that he was also hiding something. Something that would change the course of everything. This is not just a story of betrayal. It is a story of choices, of pain that tears, but also of forgiveness that heals, of a man who had every reason to give up, but found in the most unlikely place a purpose that even he could not imagine. Stay with me until the end, because this story will make you reflect on what really matters when everything falls apart. And if you believe that some stories are capable of touching the heart and changing lives, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Here, every story has soul, truth, and faith. It was a morning like any other, with the soft warmth of the sun coming through the living room window. But for Felipe, the tranquility was about to be brutally broken. He was sitting at the table looking at his cell phone when a message appeared. A message he didn't want to see, but at the same time he knew was about to reveal the truth he feared so much. His wife, Mariana, who was 7 months pregnant, had always been the love of his life. They had spent almost a decade together, sharing dreams and plans. But what Michael didn't know was that Mariana was living a secret, something he would never have imagined. The betrayal he was about to discover was not just a breach of trust, but a direct blow to the heart of what he believed to be a happy life. As he stared at his cell phone screen, the feeling of being hit by a train seemed to form in his chest. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was there, clear and undeniable. The messages between Mariana and another man were too explicit for any excuse. Felipe felt a growing anger, mixed with a terrifying fear of losing everything they had built together. He took a deep breath, trying to understand what was happening. How could she do this to him, especially during such a delicate pregnancy? Each word in that message felt like a blade, cutting through the promises of a family life he had idealized. The pain was deep, but something inside him told him there was still more to be revealed. With his cell phone still in his hands, Felipe got up from the table, not knowing what to do. Anger and confusion took over his body, but he knew he had to face reality. Mariana was in the living room, doing some work on the computer. The soft sound of her footsteps on the wood seemed distant, almost as if she were in another world. She, so calm, did not realize that her life was about to fall apart. Michael sat in the chair in front of her, breathing heavily, trying to disguise the turmoil inside him. His gaze met hers, but nothing seemed more distant than the warmth of the embrace that once meant affection. He could no longer ignore the truth. He had to ask. He had to ask the difficult question. "Mariana," his voice was hoarse, as if a storm was about to explode. "What's really happening? What have you been doing?" She looked at him, surprised, but not yet knowing the weight of the accusation. "What do you mean, Michael?" she replied, a confused expression taking over her face. He placed his cell phone on the table without saying a word, just letting the messages speak for themselves. The silence that followed was piercing. Mariana's look went from astonishment to discomfort as she began to realize that something was very wrong. She tried to explain, stuttered, but the words were lost. There was no denying it. The truth was there, right in front of her. "I don't know what happened, Felipe," she began, her eyes watering. I made a mistake, but it's not what you think." But he couldn't listen to excuses anymore. His mind was in a whirlwind, thinking about everything they had lived together, about all the moments that now seemed false. The anger, the pain, The feeling of betrayal was stronger than any explanation. But Mariana didn't know that he also had something to reveal, something that would change everything, something that would make her understand that he had, in fact, discovered much more than she imagined. The silence that hung in the air was almost palpable. Mariana stood there, trying to find words, but nothing seemed enough to describe the gravity of what was happening. She looked at Michael, searching for an answer, but she couldn't understand the pain that was written all over his face. Something wasn't right, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't look away from his expression. She knew he was hurt, but she didn't know how much crueler the truth could be. Felipe stood up abruptly, moving away from her, and went to the window. His gaze was lost in the landscape outside, but his mind was miles away, lost in the storm of conflicting feelings. Anger was starting to be replaced by a strange feeling of revenge that he never knew he carried. "Do you think I don't know everything, Mariana?" His voice was cold and controlled now, but there was something else, a deep pain that spilled over between the words. "Do you think I'm a fool?" Mariana tried to speak, but he interrupted her. "I know what you did, but you don't know what I know." He turned to her, his gaze piercing, almost challenging. Her expression changed from surprise to subtle fear. She didn't know what he meant. Felipe walked over to the table and picked up something that was hidden under a pile of papers, a white envelope with no name on it, but with a message he knew he should keep. She looked at him with wide eyes, understanding dawning. "Do you think you can play with people's trust without suffering the consequences?" He opened the envelope slowly, revealing a photo he had received in secret months before. A photo of her, with the man with whom the betrayal had happened. The image left no doubt. It was impossible to deny. "That was before you found out you were pregnant, wasn't it?" Felipe asked, his voice sharp. He was controlling every word, but the pain was still reflected in his eyes. Mariana was speechless. She didn't know what to do, how to react. She would never have imagined that Felipe already knew, that he had discovered everything before he even confronted her. She tried to explain, but the words got stuck in her throat. She wanted to apologize, she wanted to take it back. But the gravity of the mistake was so deep that words didn't seem enough. Felipe then took a deep breath and said with frightening calm, "You still don't know everything. I knew what was going on between you, Mariana, but I never imagined you would be so cruel. Now I'm going to tell you something that will change everything. Something you would never expect." The tension between them increased with each second. The pain of betrayal mixed with the feeling of revenge that Felipe was now beginning to feed. He had something more to reveal, and when he did, Mariana would finally understand that the truth wasn't just painful, it was devastating. Michael knew the moment of revelation was near, but it wasn't easy. He looked at Mariana, her eyes now filled with tears, her expression a mix of despair and regret. She knew the truth was slipping through her fingers like sand, but at the same time, something inside her urged her to try to justify herself. "Michael, please listen to me," she said, her voice shaking. "I know I was wrong, but that's not all. I was lost. But Michael didn't let her finish. He needed to be direct, needed her to know that he was no longer the man who believed in her promises. The pain of knowing that his trust had been broken was no longer a burden he was willing to carry alone. "Do you think that was all it was?" Michael interrupted with calm fury. He approached her and, with a fixed gaze, said, "I knew about your betrayal, yes. But the truth is that, when you walked away from me, I also walked away from you. I started to see things from another perspective, a perspective that you didn't know." He sat down, taking his time to observe her reactions, feeling the weight of his own words. Mariana looked at him with wide eyes, trying to understand what he meant, but at the same time something inside her began to make sense. She knew Felipe was hiding something much bigger. "I did something wrong too, Mariana," he continued, his voice now softer but still full of emotion. "I didn't tell you everything about what was happening in my life. I was also with someone else when you were already pregnant. It wasn't a betrayal, but I walked away from you all the same. And deep down, I knew that it couldn't be ignored." Silence filled the room. Mariana stood paralyzed, not knowing how to react. The last thing she expected was that Felipe, from whom she believed she was so distant, had also done something she never imagined. The pain of knowing that he had also distanced himself from the relationship was about to destroy all the justifications she had tried to build for what he did. Felipe looked at her with an expression that mixed suffering and relief. "I made a mistake too, Mariana, and what I'm going to tell you now will change everything." Mariana, now in shock, didn't know if she wanted to hear it. The weight of the truth was becoming unbearable for both of them. But Michael knew he could no longer hide what really happened, something that would make her look at their relationship in a completely new way. Something that would undoubtedly reveal the power of redemption even after the pain and betrayal. Michael took a deep breath. It was time, the moment to tell what he had been keeping inside for months. He didn't want to say it. He didn't want to make that moment even more painful. But he knew he had to be honest. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about something that cut even deeper. Something Mariana would never have imagined. "Mariana," he began, looking straight into her eyes. "Remember when you told me you were pregnant? I smiled. I hugged you. I cried with emotion. But that same week, something inside me told me there was something wrong." She frowned, confused, as if she couldn't connect the dots. But he continued, "I took a fertility test in secret, something I never wanted to tell you. I had some strange symptoms, pains, and the doctor recommended I investigate. The result came back a few days after you told me you were pregnant." The silence hung heavy in the air. Mariana felt the blood drain from her face. Michael's words seemed to echo like thunder inside her. "Mariana, the test showed that I'm sterile. I can't have children." The words came out like a sharp knife. Mariana put her hand to her mouth, trying to contain her shock. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time it was different. It wasn't just guilt. It was despair. "I've always been sterile. The doctor showed me, explained everything. I took the test twice to be sure. And when you told me about the pregnancy, I wanted to believe it was a miracle, something divine, something that God had made happen. But after I saw the messages, everything started to make sense. Everything." Michael. Voice began to fail. He stood up, pacing back and forth, trying to maintain control. "I've spent the last few months trying to understand how to react, how to stay by your side, how to look at you. And the baby." Mariana, now in tears, tried to touch Felipe, but he backed away. She wanted to talk, wanted to explain, but the guilt had turned into a wound that words wouldn't heal. Michael turned to her, his eyes brimming with tears. "You destroyed more than our marriage, Mariana. You destroyed the only thing I still thought was pure about us." Michael, in turn, understood that forgiveness was not an end point. It was a path, a process. It didn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It just meant that he wouldn't let the betrayal define who he would be from then on. He had an important decision to make: stay married or move on alone, but in peace. And above all, understand what his role would be in the life of that child who was on the way. It was during a conversation with his father, a man of few words and much wisdom, that Michael heard something that remained engraved in his soul. "Son, sometimes life tears us apart to sew us back together stronger, and forgiveness is not about the other person. It's about not holding on to the same mistake every day." That sentence hit home. Maybe that was what he needed to hear. So, Michael decided he would stay. Not for Mariana, but for the baby. For the chance to give him, or her, a childhood in which love, respect, and responsibility were present. And who knows, with time, even his relationship with Mariana could change. Not in what it once was, but in something new, more honest, more true. At the next prenatal appointment, he held her hand. Not as a loving husband, but as a man who chose not to repeat what the world does so easily: abandon. He chose to stay. For the life that was forming, for the faith that even from the greatest pain, God can draw purposes that we still don't understand. And it was in that ultrasound exam, listening to the strong and fast beating of that little heart, that Michael felt something inexplicable, a peace that didn't come from logic, a certainty that was born from within. He was in the right place. No matter how difficult it was, no matter how much it hurt, he had chosen to love. In the days that followed, the house began to breathe differently. There were still silences, yes, but they were no longer filled with anger. They were the silences of those who think, of those who feel, of those who seek to find some peace after the storm. Mariana, now calmer, approached more carefully. He didn't ask for forgiveness with words. He asked for it with actions. Small ones, daily ones, but sincere ones. Michael, in turn, understood that forgiveness wasn't an end point. It was a path, a process. It didn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It just meant that he wouldn't let the betrayal define who he would be from then on. He had an important decision to make: stay married or move on alone, but in peace. And above all, understand what his role would be in the life of that child who was on the way. It was during a conversation with his father, a man of few words and much wisdom, that Michael heard something that stuck in his soul. "Son, sometimes life tears us apart to make us stronger, and forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you not getting stuck in the same mistake every day." That sentence hit him hard. Maybe that was what he needed to hear. So Michael decided he would stay. Not for Mariana, but for the baby. For the chance to give him, or her, a childhood where love, respect, and responsibility were present. And who knows, with time, even the relationship with Mariana could change. Not into what it once was, but into something new, more honest, more true. At the next prenatal appointment, he held her hand. Not as a loving husband, but as a man who chose not to repeat what the world does so easily: abandon. He chose to stay for the life that was forming, for the faith that even from the greatest pain, God can draw purposes that we still don't understand. And it was during that ultrasound exam, listening to the strong and rapid beating of that little heart, that Felipe felt something inexplicable, a peace that didn't come from logic, a certainty that was born from within. He was in the right place. No matter how difficult it was, no matter how much it hurt, he had chosen to love. Felipe could have let hate win. He could have turned his back, closed his heart, and followed the road of bitterness. But he chose another path. He chose not to let pain define who he would be. He discovered that the cruelest betrayal can even hurt the soul. But love, when born from forgiveness, can flourish even in the driest soil. Not every wound needs to turn into resentment. Sometimes it becomes a bridge, and sometimes the greatest act of courage is to continue loving, even without forgetting what hurt. Michael understood that forgiving is not giving the other person reason, it is freeing yourself, and starting over with purpose. Now I ask you, what about you? Have you ever experienced a situation that forced you to choose between pain and forgiveness? What would you do if you were in his place? If this story touched you in any way, if it made you think, feel, or remember someone special, like the video, share it with anyone who needs to hear it today. And of course, subscribe to the channel. Here, each story is told with soul, and it could be the answer someone is waiting for.